Hello, everybody. This is April Busby over here at Clark County Historical Museum, and welcome today to our virtual summer history walking tour. And today I am joined by Pat Gelada. Hi, Pat.
Hello, April.
And we are doing our newest tour, the Women's Star Tour, and we're going to take a look at some of the key women in Vancouver's history throughout time. So, looking forward to it. So we're starting, like we often do, here at the museum and the Carnegie Public Library. Pat, you want to talk a little bit about some of the history here?
Oh, for heaven's sakes, yes, indeed. The building, it was opened on New Year's Eve, 1909, and in the evening. And the reason they opened it at night was because it had electric lights. What an exciting time to have electric lights. Brand new experience for Vancouver.
Well, I think it's funny. One of the stories I've heard here is that although they used the lights for the first night, the librarians were nervous about using them, so they continued using oil lights for a while.
There were gas lines that ran through the building. You've heard the expression hissy fit. When the fire department found out we still had gas lines running through the walls, that's what they had.
Yeah, fire and books don't normally work very well.
No. One of the most delightful women of when it was the library was a lady named Esther Allen. And there are maybe some really old timers that still remember Esther Allen. She was a maiden lady. She never married. Her sister was developmentally disabled, so she spent her life caring for her sister. And Esther's domain was the children's section downstairs. And the folks today who are pensioned off can still remember as little ones going into that part of the library and talking to lovely Miss Esther Allen.
Oh, and we have some pictures of Esther in our photo collection and in our library.
A delightful lady, very active in the community, aside from caring for her sister. Eastern Star, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then, of course, we also have Eva Santee, who is important.
What an incredible person was Eva Santee, absolutely tireless. She had been the librarian at Camas, and we actually stole her from Camas. The city went to Eva and offered her a 50% pay raise if she would come and take over our library and straighten it out, which she did. And she got here just in time because, of course, we went to war in December of 1941. By 1942, the population was exploding with the shipyard workers, and Eva made sure there were libraries in each one of the 6 housing developments. She talked the army out of a truck to make a bookmobile. How do you tuck the army out of a truck? She did. And she, with no building materials, she did add on the first brick addition to the building during that time as well. What she wanted and what she fought for was a regional library system. She joined every club she could join so she could go and talk about a regional library system. The economics of buying in bulk, having more books to circulate back and forth. And that's all she did indeed accomplish that before she retired. And we have, I think, one of the finest library systems in the country right here because of Eva. We should
definitely
Eva.
And then, of course, we're just coming across the old regional library building that Eva helped build.
Yes.
And it's actually on the historical register. And then we are coming up on the Hidden House and the
Yes.
Women of the Hiddens.
And the historical phone book.
Oh, and a story, yes, yes. I imagine there are some people who don't know what that's actually for anymore.
That's true. To stick your head in the rain while you talk on your cell phone.
But so of the Hiddens, I mean, we have Mary Hidden, the matriarch of the family, and whose family just kind of exploded and became such big parts of the community, as well as Julia, who came along in '82. You want to
Yes.
talk a little bit about Mary and Julia?
Oh, well, Julia, a beautiful young woman with a beautiful voice. She sang in church, of course. She gave small concerts. There was, of course, no chance of her ever becoming a professional musician because that was not woman's place in those days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of course, to this day, the women of the Hidden family are active in Vancouver in our society, though not as prominent in the news as they once were.
But yep, still movers and shakers, and you can find them in a lot of different places.
Yes, you can indeed. In fact, if the building you're in ever stops being a library, that will return to the ownership of the Hiddens.
Yep, that's part of our grant, correct?
Yes. So you
And
can,
then Maria, I know with Maria Hidden, she was the first president of the Vancouver Women's Club, correct?
yes, yes. And the Women's Club against a charitable, still in existence, maintaining the Covington House. And there again, another Richard and Anna Covington, a woman who helped run the girls' school in the Covington House. Again, a talented musician. She had the first piano shipped to Vancouver. Women in music, they maintain music in Vancouver through the years. The Hidden family, and of course the Covingtons, were left here and went to Hawaii. Oh well.
But they left behind their piano, which is beautiful and is part of our music exhibit right now.
That's right. That's right.
All right, and then as we're walking here, we're actually going to be coming up on the Old City Hall.
It's amazing that that's now the old City Hall.
Yeah, because it's not that far behind since you were there, right?
Oh, that's right. I spent 20 years in that building every blessed Monday night, practically. The first woman on city council, Helma, Helma Powell. She was elected when we switched from strong mayor council form of government to weak mayor council manager form of government. That's when she was elected to city council. And it really didn't make a big splash in the paper, first woman. I mean, it was announced that she'd won, but the big news was, of course, the change in the form of government. We've had women on the council since. Jean Norwood. Jean had a baby while she was on the city council.
Oh my goodness.
The paper had to say, we can no longer call them city fathers because we have a mother. And she took the baby with her to city council meetings. And then, of course, Rose Besserman, incredible name, incredible mind. Rose could see the value of advanced planning, of transportation planning. She was my mentor. She was the mentor of many women in government. With her common sense. And whenever I would make a decision, honestly, it would be, what would Rose do? And then there was Ethel Lehman, another powerful woman that came on very much as I was. I took Ethel's seat when she retired, and both of us were very much involved in the public safety part of government. And now we have Ethel ran for mayor and lost. She was, I think, the first woman to run. But now, of course, we have Ann McInerney Ogle, our first woman mayor.
Yeah. And then we're going to take a brief look here at the Vancouver funeral. So this, by our notes, is Hazel Smith, our first female mortician here in Washington, was the mortician here at the Vancouver Funeral Chapel.
Yes, one of them. You know, they started out where the family that started the mortuary started out working for the railroad, of all things. And then moved on into the funeral business. And that's a landmark in Vancouver, and it still stands. You know, you see it surrounded by the modern buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And it does stand out as a landmark.
And along here, so one of our next locations will be the Academy, which there's so much we could talk about the Academy. But one of the interesting things, because we're also walking around an area that used to be part of the hidden brickyards. So one of the things we found out recently is that there's a connection between those, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I just kind of want to lay that down there.
Oh, that's a great story. Yes, you must tell it.
But we have another story we're coming up to about this location. These are the Academy Apartments. And Pat, you did some work around this, and because I believe this is the location of your book, The Murder of Joanne Dewey, correct?
That's right. That was the scene of the kidnapping. The Academy Apartments then, very upscale. Ella Wentler, who we may talk about, was our legislator. That was her home in the Academy Apartments. But that street was the scene of a violent kidnapping of a young woman in April of 1950. And her body was found in Skamania County, and two brothers were convicted for the crime and executed. A story that divided our community, and there are still echoes of that division today, which is why I felt compelled to write that book. Here is actually what happened. No conjecture, no what ifs, just that. So
that's the facts, yeah. All right, so and now we're at the Academy, and of course, Mother Joseph. Do you want to start us off here?
Mother Joseph was a French woman from Montreal. I think one of my favorite Mother Joseph stories is when she was a young girl, and there was a rebellion actually against the British. We had a revolution. They saw a United States. France had a revolution. They felt that the French-speaking citizens of Canada should rebel against England. Her brother was a captain, and I think she got a little, I can do that, because she organized a group of young people, carved wooden rifles for them, and marched them, drilled them, and won awards for it. And then the bishop said it was a mortal sin if they rebelled against England. So that was the end of her military career.
Well, she was definitely one who did not believe in the no girl allowed clubs. So the fun story that we have discovered recently is that Mother Joseph was not satisfied when she was designing things like the Academy and other buildings that became kind of the cornerstones of Vancouver. She was not content with the building materials that were available. And so she actually is the one who helped Hidden get his land plot. We believe she may have actually given it to him, but we don't know yet. And then she convinced him to go into bricks so that she could have the bricks she wanted for building.
That does sound just like her, doesn't it? You see the niche on the up on the apex of the roof. There's a niche where there used to be a statue of Saint Joseph, and there was another statue of Saint Joseph in the chapel. And in the Great Flood of 1893, as the water rose toward the Father Blanchet nursing home, which she had built, and the vegetable garden, she took the statue of Saint Joseph down to the edge of the garden, looked at the river and said, "That far and no farther." And anyone who's been to Catholic school understands why the river came no further.
Well, and actually we have some interesting stories about Mother Joseph in the construction. I mean, you talk about her going and getting the statue of St. Joseph, but she had no problems climbing up. Did you want to tell that story a little bit?
Oh, dear. Yeah, she was up on a ladder and got stuck and couldn't get down. And they had to bring in men to get her down off this ladder. And the only English words she knew at that time were from the construction guys. So all she knew was swear words. And she swore all the way down the ladder. Oh, you did. At one point, she was with another nun out begging for money to build more academies, more schools, more hospitals. And robbers stopped the coach that they were in and hauled everybody out and began robbing everyone, including the two nuns. And Mother Joseph transfixed the youngest bandit and said, "You pick up that valise and bring it to me." And he did. It was $400 in gold.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I mean, there are so many great stories about her, and actually, and the sisters of the Academy as well. Like they were a busy bunch.
Yes, she died a painful death in 1902 of a brain tumor. But her last words were, "Remember, sisters, whatever we do for the poor." That kind of summed up her life, didn't it?
Yeah, very much so.
We just passed the cornerstone. Did you want to?
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
No, why don't you go ahead and because we're past it now. It's the cornerstone.
Oh, that's one that I don't know very well on the cornerstone. That's one of Brad's stories. We gave him the day off.
It was put in later, actually. You know, this garden that we're walking through is in the shape of a heart.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it is. It's the Sacred Heart. And you can only see it from up above or up in the third floor of the Academy. You can see that this is indeed in the shape of a heart. And they did build a restaurant over part of the heart, which fortunately is now gone. But they had actually intended to put an identical building on the other side of the heart. And that didn't happen. Thank you.
Oh, thank goodness, yes. So we're moving on to the library. And we've got several. I mean, not only do we have, of course, the library is part of Eva Santee's work, in that we continue to see the library improving on what she started. But we have several key women here as well, outside of even that. So we have
two poets.
Two poets, yes. So
Let's talk
Mary
about,
Bernard, of course. Did you want to start?
no, why don't you talk about them, the two ladies?
Um, Mary Bernard Shaw was a poet. She from Vancouver. She spent quite a bit of time here. She was actually she was friends with Ezra Pound, another famous poet who was not known for being the most friendly person. Um, and we have actually have a collection of her poetry here at the museum, that in the museum store. But one of her big things, or one of the things she's very well known for, is her translation of the works of Sappho, an
Yeah.
ancient Greek poet. And then we also have Elizabeth Yates, and I don't have as much information on Elizabeth.
No, well, you didn't. Women in those days very often, in fact, published under male names or their initials. But yes, another poet who was connected here. We, you wonder really, it's so hard to track women's history in those days because they went under their husband's name all the way through. You look on the side of the museum there and you see Ada Brown, and that's only because she was a widow. We're going to talk about her later, aren't we?
Yeah. And one of the things about Yates that I failed to mention, so she actually was published in the Oregonian, so you can find a lot of her poems in the archives of the Oregonian. And then, yeah, we've got Ada, and just, I mean, if you think about it, the libraries were often a strong piece of women power, even during a time where women weren't visible. So in our new exhibit, we spend some time talking about like the Lyceum clubs and the reading book clubs, Lyceum book and book clubs. But speaking of women and authors and books, you as well. I mean, you've had several books come out about local history.
Yes, in fact, my son was asking me the other day, and he figured out that I was making about $1.25 an hour writing the books. But the first one was we had done an exhibit at the county fair for the county. The county had a booth, and they wanted us to do a timeline of Clark County history in that booth. And I said, well, my eyes glaze over. Nobody is going to come into a booth and look at a timeline in a fair, but everybody is fascinated with their own story. So let's get photographs of all of the towns in Vancouver and or in Clark County and how they got their name and make an exhibit around that. And it was a great success, tremendous success. And I think I had 61 towns and areas. So they said, why don't we print that up as a handout? And I said, why don't we print that up, expand it, and sell it as a fundraiser?
Yeah.
So that's how the first one came, the first naming Clark County. And we kind of did it in a rush, little book, got it out, cheap binding. I think we sold it for $5. I wish we'd taken more time with that. A lot of errata in that one. I rewrote it again about 10 years later. And then the Ghost Stories book, the first one, Darkness Next Door. A new ghost book is coming out
right?
September 14th called Haunted Vancouver, Washington. And then Arcadia Press called me and wanted to know if I knew anyone who could write a book about Vancouver. Well, yeah. So
who else, right?
Yeah. And now I'm with History Press. They did the Joanne Dewey book, and they're doing the ghost book. So it's been a trip. But it all started with that. We're not going to do a timeline in the film.
All right, and then we just passed the Columbian building, and the Anne Campbell and the Campbell family. There have been many, many women who have been involved with the
Oh my,
Columbian over the years.
oh yes, well, just recently, of course, Jody Campbell, Scott's wife, she was just as involved in the newspaper as Scott was, but also in the community in charitable philanthropic work. Jill Campbell, Scott's sister, is the head of the Houck Foundation. The Campbell family, Don Campbell, uh, found out what he wanted to find out what made a city charming, and he found out or deduced that it was trees, street trees. And he came back to town. I believe it was $10,000 that he donated to start planting trees on the streets of Vancouver. And right next to between the Hidden House and the old City Hall is a sculpture which is dedicated to those people who have contributed to the greening of Vancouver, planting the trees on the streets. And his is the first name on it. And of course, his wife was, I think it was her urging that started it.
Okay. Sorry, my video is jumping around a bit. But so we're on our way over to the Sedgwick building. So one thing with Clark County is we have several firsts as far as women in the medical profession. Not only did we have, of course, the sisters and the St. Joseph Hospital and such, but we also had, and we talked about Hazel Smith, but we're also at the building known as Murray's Corner. We have Dr. Isabel Sedgwick. Did you want to talk a little bit about her?
Yes, an early woman doctor. She practiced here. She also went to Portland and practiced, specializing in women's diseases. She was accused of performing an illegal operation, which we all know today what that illegal operation was.
Yeah.
She was not found guilty of it. However, it did destroy her reputation. She was found dead with a handkerchief soaked in chloroform over her face. They put it down to an accident.
It's really hard for a medical professional to accidentally do, but
you don't deliberately put a chloroform handkerchief over your face. Our other early doctor, Dr. Louisa Wright, whom I also love, also died tragically when, according to her husband, he was hooking a horse to a single tree, and she walked out and her apron flapped, and the horse kicked her in the jaw and killed her. I've been around horses a lot. None of them will throw a right cross. So I'm very suspicious of that death.
Well, and the other interesting thing, one of the things I love about her is that she nearly became Camus's first woman mayor, and lost by one vote, but she refused to actually run. So she put herself on the ballot.
Herself, yes.
She didn't want anything to do with it.
She did not want it. When we left Providence Academy, we did not really, or St. Joe's, we did not talk about the nursing school there.
Oh, yes.
And, many fine nurses from St. Joseph's are still practicing some, but one in particular, Harriet Allen, a fine early nurse here in Vancouver, and she enlisted in the Army during World War I, and was actually sent to the front lines, what we would today call a MASH unit. She had to buy her own uniform and was paid $2 a month. And at the end of that time, she was told she was not a veteran. She
Oh,
tried to re-enlist in World War II, but was too old. So these are the stories that we have from Clark County. Absolutely heroic women, and
well,
especially the
and
doctors.
I think I've heard mentioned that while we're talking about the women of the military, Vancouver was one of the first places that women were recruited,
The very first.
the very first.
And it was the recruiting office was in what was at that time an American Legion Hall, and it was at Third. It's under the freeway now. Fourth Street was not Third, Fourth Street, and the article in the Columbian said, "Women of Clark County, serve your country." And the next morning, when they opened, the women were lined up around the block. They'd come from all over Clark County to enlist in the Army.
And we had some pretty well-known women who served. One of the ones we're working on right now is a mini piece on Mary Bates.
Yes.
And we have several items from her and her time as I'm gonna a wave, I believe she was.
And with the museum, Victoria Ransom, very active board member and volunteer. And Victoria had been a major. She told me once that when the German prisoners of war were here and they worked at Barnes Hospital, and Victoria said she liked to walk past them because they had to salute her as a major, and they didn't like saluting a woman. So she did it often.
Yeah, no, and being someone who spent a lot of time around the military, a lot of the men still don't. It's still something we're working on. But now we're at the former home of the CC store. And
Yes.
this is one of those cases where we have a woman who is very prolific in our community, but for various reasons we don't know a lot about, and that's Sally. Do you want to talk a
Sally
little bit
Carter,
about
therefore the CC store. That's where the name came from, the two Carters.
Yeah, and unfortunately, yeah, and she's one whose story was lost. We know Sally Carter's name. We know she was very busy in the store while her brother Walter was busy with the city. He was busy politically. He was busy socially, which means she was likely very busy at the store while he was off doing other things. But
Absolutely.
completely, unfortunately, not much about her.
Well, the family had been shopkeepers for a long, long time. And this was kind of their the big deal was this store. And a lot of people still remember the cans on strings that sent the money up to the cashier's booth. And a lot of people remember the sales in the basements. And that was where you went for your Boy Scout uniform, your Girl Scouts, your uniforms for St. Joe's or for Providence Academy. Why do I keep doing that today? That was the store of Vancouver.
And I mean, even today, we have a lot of women who are who own businesses downtown, and a lot of stories that are kind of lost in history. So for us, we have lots of photos that are unidentified women. They're identified by their family, but not who they are. And then we go down, we start talking about businesses here in downtown Vancouver, and we know the businesses, but not necessarily the women behind them. And part of that, I think, we've discussed this before earlier today, was the fact that people are in record. They're named as, the women are described as the wife of someone.
Yes. You know, reason I think, this is just a conjecture, that we have so many strong women here. There was a time when the Donation Land Claim Act was modified, well, a new Donation Land Claim Act which allowed women to actually make land claims of their own, half as much as a man, but they could actually do a land claim. And that brought a lot of strong women to the West, to the Northwest, to take advantage of those land claims. So we had this infusion of strong, independent women. Now, that's my conjecture.
Well, and I mean, if you look at the way things were in most of the other country at that time, women weren't allowed to have land. They weren't allowed to keep their claims, or they could keep it unless they remarried, and then the husband would get it. So,
exactly.
Okay.
And they had to be strong to make it out here in the first place. The weak ones turned back. The strong ones.
Yeah, I mean, well, and yeah, a lot of the women who came out here, who came out with families, their husbands were off to the gold rush or off fighting the war, and they were here with multiple children and a huge lot of land that needed to be maintained.
Okay, well, I believe it's the University of Washington has the diary of Amelia Knight, who came out with her husband Paul, who was a doctor, 5 wagons with her many children, and she kept a day-to-day diary of the trek west by covered wagon. And they swapped one of the wagons for a cabin, rafted across the Columbia River to what we now call Knight's Landing. Paul later died, and she married Mr. Leeser, who had the land claim next to the Knight claim. That marriage only lasted 90 days. How I wish I knew that story, but those records were destroyed in the courthouse fire.
Yeah, her diary, we actually published it in one of our publications back in our 1965 publication.
Yes. Oh, she was a fascinating woman. Very strong woman. Took care of her kids, took care of the Leeser kids after their mother died. And that's, of course, how she came to marry Mr. Leeser. But,
and now we're at one of the Schofield buildings. So do you want to talk a little bit about Mary?
Well, which Mary?
Mary Smith. Mary the First. Yes, the Schofields, there's a lot of Marys in that family line.
Oh, there are. And of course, the Pat Schofield is now Pat Asheris, and is still, that family is still active in Vancouver. The Mary the Younger, of course, was, Mary was a businesswoman. A very astute businesswoman, still while raising her children. Younger Mary became the first bank president. You know, this building, the Schofield built, they really, I knew rather well the last Ed Schofield. And he said the family really isn't sure when that building was built. They did have photographs of it, of soldiers marching off to the Spanish-American War, passing it. But they said they really couldn't prove when they built that building.
Yeah, and so Mary I think it's Mary Smith. We also have a Mary Schofield who was the first woman banker.
Yes. Well, and became a bank president as well. That was the second Mary, I believe.
That was the second Mary. Okay. Yeah, this is where it's like, okay, which Mary are we talking about? And so we are, we've got a little bit of stretch here. So to go back to some of the women we've talked about, if we think about some of the women business owners right now, obviously we have several who are busy in the community, who work. We've talked about some of the hidden still are in the community, the Schofields, but we also have in the nonprofit world several women who are still.
Glenda Glover has the four nonprofits business downtown, uh, and has had for quite some time. Lee Rafferty, who was the power behind the Downtown Vancouver Association. And now we're coming up on the heart of Vancouver.
The heart, yes. Do you want to give a little story, a little history on this one? This is the Heart and Stone sculpture.
Yes, and it is dedicated to the women founders of Vancouver. And I was fortunate enough to be included in the dedication of this sculpture. It's a metal sculpture, as most of our works downtown are. And on it are the names of some of those women. And one thing we did, we had stones at the dedication, and you were to write on the stone the name of a woman who influenced your life, and that was put around the heart. And so I imagine they're still there. So it included women from around, well, actually, it could have been from around the world.
And one of the designers of it was a woman. That was Jennifer, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, talk about her. You take that one. It was. It's nice that it's across from the Esther Short Park.
And that's a great time to start talking. Like another woman with lots of stories behind her and lots going on, Esther Short herself. You want to take that, or you want me?
Well, we can both do it because there's. Why don't you start off and I'll chime in later.
Okay, so what we know about Esther is she came here. She was actually from Pennsylvania, and her husband Amos came out here on a land claim. They had 10 children, I believe.
10, yes.
6 survived to adulthood, and they were also quite busy in the community. But she fought a lot with the city when it came time for her land claims. You want to talk about a little bit about that, her legal pieces?
Well, it was not with the city particularly. Amos was kind of chasing the brass ring, always looking to make his money. And they kept coming west and stopping, trying to settle, stopping. They finally made it here. And this land claim they took belonged to someone else, Henry Williamson, who had actually filed it in the federal courthouse at Oregon City. He had actually laid out a plat of a little town, which he called Vancouver City, to differentiate it from the fort. It was Vancouver City. Today, it's basically Husong and Larry's and the Crab Shack. That's basically the town site. And he registered all of that. When the Shorts came here, it was British. And the Hudson's Bay Company had been left in charge of Williamson's land claim while he went off hunting for gold. And they didn't want the Shorts on that land claim because they were taking care of it for someone else. The Shorts assumed that Williamson had abandoned the land claim and therefore they could jump it as an abandoned claim. And that dispute went on. Eventually, the Hudson's Bay Company sent Dr. David Gardner and a couple of Hawaiians there to talk to them. They'd done everything they could. They burned the cabin. They said Esther and the kids adrift in a boat. They took them away. They kept coming back. And Dr. Gardner and the people from the Hudson's Bay Company, Amos shot and killed Dr. Gardner and was taken to trial. He was found not guilty by reason of self-defense. Then we became American in 1846. And Amos's son, Jesse, ran off to Southern California to the gold rush, came back with a ton of money in gold that he had brought back. and told his father that there was money to be made in fruits and vegetables to be sent to California because the world had come to California.
Right.
So they started this business. This was just Amos finally hit the gold ring. He was making tons of money shipping fruits and vegetables from Clark County to San Francisco. On one trip, the Vandalia, the ship he was on, struck the sandbar at the mouth of the Columbia River. Ship was lost, all on board were lost. Esther is now suddenly a widow. She wasted no time going to Oregon City to declare herself the true heir to that land claim. That's when she found out he had never really registered it. He had become a probate judge. I mean, he had courtroom experience, didn't he? He became a probate judge and had awarded himself the title to the property, but did not register that with the
Didn't
federal.
register.
So land claim was total. The title was totally clouded. There was the Beers family claimed it. The Williamson claim was still intact. The Catholic Church claimed a big chunk of it under the Missionary Act, and now the Army has come in and is claiming a big chunk of it under the Military Act. And then the city was being formed, and they claimed part of it as a town site. You have a map there in the museum, all the overlapping land claims. All went. She came back from Oregon City after having filed her notice of settlement, affidavit of settlement, that she had settled on the land prior to 1845. She gave half of it to her kids, divided up among the 10 kids. She started selling off the rest. And that was fine until the first piece of property resold and the clouded title came up and we went to court. And we were in court for 50 years over the title land claim. And that did slow the growth of Vancouver, because if you're going to buy land and start a business, start a dynasty here, you went to Oregon where you could get clear title to the land. It was the entrepreneurs, the hiddens, the people who are kind of willing to take a chance.
Right.
The Schofields, those folks, they were more daring. And they started our community. In fact, the Elks building, we passed the Elks building. On the addition to the Elks building, which is to the south of the main Heritage building, that was added in 1921. And the Elks had to pay the Bishop of Nisqually $30, I believe it was, to clear the title so that they could build that addition. So, and of course, she gave a section of her land to be a public plaza forever. She gave a section of her land to be a public wharf forever. We call it Inn at the Quay. And then she disinherited 9 of her 10 children. She left everything to Hannah, who was in a wheelchair. I think that she left the other children out because she'd given them land. She'd started them in businesses.
They were set up.
They were set up, but they did not agree, and they went to court. So there was another cloud on the title of the land with the family itself suing itself. And at one point, in fact, Jesse put the land up for sale, the park up for sale. And the mayor at that time went out and said, nobody buy it.
Right. Well, and so we're sitting on the edge of Estes Park looking at the city hall, the new city hall, where we've had quite a few women involved. One of first woman by the voters chosen to serve city council, Hilma Powers, was one of the women that we wanted to talk about a little bit around here.
Yeah, Hilma was a teacher. So many of the teachers, she was a teacher at Vancouver High School. so many of the teachers became active in local government, and we can go through them all. You know, uh, it's something in the dedication of these women. Uh, why was I dedicated? Why did I run? Two reasons. Number one, I had served for 22 years as a technical employee of the Los Angeles Police Department, unsworn civilian employee, but 22 years. There was a scandal going on with the police department and a chief that they couldn't fire. And also, I was a curator at the Grant House Historical Museum. And that was when they decided to turn the museum into a restaurant. And I did not like the way I was received when I objected to taking a museum away from the people. So my husband said, you know, the only way to change policy is to be a policymaker. And that's why I ran for city council, for number one, you know, preserve this history, stop tearing it all down, although some were lost while I was on council, and a strong regulated police department. And I was just going to serve 4 years and leave, but good heavens, 20 years later.
That is what happens, isn't it?
It is indeed. I have found women in politics, women for the most part, go into politics to fix something. And here we are at the, okay, the Slocum House.
Yep.
I kind of got off on a tangent there, I'm sorry. But you go ahead, you talk about Slocum House first.
But so yeah, the Slocum House. So this is actually one of our pieces of history that was preserved by moving it, correct?
Yes, it was just 2 blocks down.
And Slocum, another one of those women who found herself here with a large land claim after she found herself widowed, and was quite prolific in society here. And then when it was moved, we then see another woman who was very important to the museum and in the community, and that's the playwright Hermine Duthie Decker.
That's right. Yes, Hermine, I think we talked earlier too, her photograph collection, which she left to the University of Washington. But Hermine wrote plays, formed theater groups, acting groups here in Vancouver. It was a driving force behind drama here. And we still have, the Magenta Theater, we still have a live theater group here in Vancouver, Clark County. She wrote a play about Esther Short, and there was some embroidery, but of course that's dramatic license. When she was in college, she fell in love with Edward R. Murrow, a classmate, and he went on to bigger things in the world as the voice of the news. And she never forgot. They remained in contact for the rest of their lives.
And so now, there's another one of the vintage phone booths. So we're heading a little bit into more of the residential areas. And we've talked about several women in these areas on our other tours, but one of the places that we're going to be stopping is the Charles Brown House. And this one is one of the women we want to talk about was Jane Alice Hubbard. And she was a member of several groups here, including another member of the Vancouver Women's Club, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, Did you want to talk a little bit about her?
Well, you go ahead with the story.
Um, so Hubbard was another teacher. So again, we see this teachers moving into other areas of the community. So she started as a teacher with the district, and then as she retired, she was principal at the central school. And you find her, she was principal for 15 years, a member of the St. Luke's Church, and an active member in the women's groups there. So you see a lot of women like this. You mentioned some earlier where you've got like Ada Brown, who started in one place and kind of moved through things and such. Did you want to talk a little bit about Ada? Because she was another one who.
Well, as I say, her name is on the side of the museum. But yeah, the Charlie Brown house. That kind of sounds like it should be pitiful. Of course, the wife of a banker, the mother, the wife of a banker. The night that the bank was closed by the bank examiner, her husband walked from the bank and looked in the windows. You can almost see him walking up, looking in those windows at his wife and the children in the parlor, waiting for him to come home. And his last look at them before he walked on up Kaufman Street and killed himself. But I want to digress here, if you don't mind. We've been talking about the Athenaeum, about the Lyceum, about the Women's Club and the work they did here. Women were if not the power, they were the pushers. And in Camas, there was one particular, you knew right away from the name that this was going to be trouble. It was the Camas Women's Social and Civic Betterment Club. No, that's going to be a problem. And the first thing they did was prevail upon the city government to fix the city steps. Camas, I think, is the only town I know of that has city steps. And they were in bad repair. They nagged until they got them fixed. They said, okay, ladies, they're fixed. Thank you very much. Go home. They said, no, wait a minute. We don't have a park. Every city has to. And so every city council meeting, they would come and ask for a park. Finally, okay, ladies, here's your park. Go away. There are no roses in that park. So they didn't make the decisions, but were very good at nagging to get things done, to push people to do it. And then until, of course, we got the vote. And I tell people that you can always tell the suffragettes, because when they changed, we got the vote here in 1910, earlier than the rest of the world. We'd gotten it earlier, but then they took it away from us again. But they let us run for school, vote in school board. They took it away. Let us vote on school issues and run for school boards. So you can tell the early suffragettes by looking at those early school boards, at the women who ran for those offices. Well, like Dr. Wright, who was on the school board.
Well, and you see a lot of those. So we have a lot of those early election cards. And you see there very much a who's who of some of these different organizations that were pushing both locally and at the state. And we talk a lot about those in our upcoming exhibit, on the Women's History exhibit. We'll talk about several of those women and how they kind of made things happen, even though they couldn't necessarily be up front.
Exactly. And I always want to tell folks to remember the women could not vote for their own suffrage. We could plead, we could argue, we could not vote. The vote was given to us by our husbands, fathers, brothers. They were the ones who had to vote to give us our right to vote.
Right.
So we can never forget the men who supported us. We worked together to get this done. A lot of men voted against us. And people said, well, that would have been hard coming home if you'd voted against it. And, they're in the booth. They're in the voting booth with the curtain drawn. They vote the way their heart
they wanted to. Yeah, the way the whole heart told them. But there's also the fun story. I think you've mentioned it, of men changing their minds or changing their votes because of they have to think about what would happen when they went home, like what up in the state. Do you want to give that little story as kind of our closing?
I'm not sure. I think that was what I was just referring to, was that the men had to give us the vote.
Yes. So maybe I apologize. I might be getting our storytellers mixed up. But there's a case where there was a gentleman who, when they were finally voting on giving women the right to vote here in Washington State, where people were convinced that he was going to vote against it, and then he voted for it. And when he explained why, it was because he had to think about how he would explain to his mother when he got home how he voted. So with that, I want to thank you so much, Pat. We're showing some of the we were going through some of the cards of some of the women that we didn't get to. There are so many, but I want to thank you for joining us and taking this tour with us. As always, it is amazing to have you here.
Thank you. And as usual, it was fun. It was fun.
All right. And you have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too, April.